Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I thought I'd do a video which has been much requested, which is a kind of follow along with me whilst I do some plant chores. I'll do some updates along the way in terms of some of the plants in my conservatory for the people that have been here for a while, and also as I'm going around and doing the care that I would normally do to my plants, I'll kind of talk about what I'm doing, what I'm using, why I'm doing it, and kind of the results that I've had from it as I remember, basically. This is going to be very much a video that's kind of off the cuff. But yeah, let's dive into the first thing that I want to do. And obviously this is, I don't know whether or not this is obvious, but this is getting filmed on a Sunday, which is usually my heaviest care day for most plants because I have the most amount of time that I can dedicate to care for my plants. So let's start with it. And I think the first thing I want to do today is actually create my Aroid mix. And I'm not going to bore you by going through the whole kind of recipe again. I'll link a video up the top there. But yeah, let's just do that really quickly and move on from there. Okay, so hopefully I would have been able to edit that into something that's a bit faster. This is going to be an interesting video to film, let's be honest. But yeah, hopefully you've seen, it's kind of standard. So my coco coir, my perlite, a lot of perlite. And then also you might have seen me use two different bags of orchid media. One which is slightly more kind of shredded, and that one won't give me as much aeration, but it will give me some. And then I use straight kind of orchid bark to kind of put it all together. I do mix in this ginormous bucket because I go through a lot of soil, especially at this time of the year, even with the fact that I've transferred quite a few of my plants into pot at the moment. But yeah, you can kind of see kind of how loose that soil is. It is a bit clumpy at the moment because I've had to rehydrate the coco coir, so it's kind of getting together, but you can kind of see how much it will kind of crumble essentially. And that for me is a sign of a really good Aroid soil mix because things don't stick together. It means that the water can freely drain from the soil media. Now the reason why I've done this today is because, and I'll pick up the plant to show you in a minute, I've got a plant which is, and I cannot remember, I'll see if I can put the name up here, the Latin name, but it's a plant that probably most people wouldn't have seen, and it's not generally a house plant. I know some people might bonsai this plant, which is quite interesting, but it is the mastic gum tree. And this kind of harkens back to my lineage of being Greek, basically, because mastic gum is kind of a resin that's taken from these trees that look a bit, when they're fully mature, they look a bit like kind of gnarled olive trees almost. They can only be found in a few places in the world. One of the places is one of the Greek islands. And essentially that resin, if you've ever had something like baklava or anything like that, and you can't place a specific flavor, which is kind of almost a bit piney or a bit kind of floral almost, it's that gum basically. So it's used by a lot of nations around the kind of Med when they're doing some of their baklavas as well. It can be very, very expensive. Obviously, the tree that I have is very, very small. I was just very excited when I found it. There is zero chance that I'm going to get it to get any form of resin, at least for another 10 to 15 or even 20 years. And if I decide to put it in and all of these things. But I'm just happy to have it because it's such a cool plant. And essentially what's happening is it's in a terracotta pot. It's been in that terracotta pot for about 2 years now. it is drying out exceptionally quickly. So I think it's time for it to get repotted. It has grown considerably since I first bought it. And yeah, what I'm also planning on doing with this one is probably not going to put it in a terracotta pot, because even in the winter, this plant does dry out a bit too quickly. So I would kind of I would like to go a bit longer between waterings. I do need the soil mix to be very, very airy, because this is a plant that if it's growing on some of the Greek islands, it's very kind of loose soil, very sandy soil. It doesn't retain moisture as much. It doesn't rain particularly a lot on some of the Greek islands. So I'm trying to emulate that, mainly because I've experienced its natural habitat. So I can kind of guesstimate based on the soil that I had in gardens and stuff like that growing up, what this probably needs. And I do need it to kind of essentially drain out quite quickly. That's part of the reason why I had it in a terracotta pot. But enough of me blathering on, let's go for the repot. So here's the tree in question, and you might be able to see the gnarliness of how that tree is growing there. And granted, I've got janky support sticks for the win again, but it is quite large. Very interestingly with this one, I think somebody on my Instagram recently who does landscaping, I think in Las Vegas in the States, was saying that this is also used quite a lot over there as a topiary, or kind of like decorative plant in the gardens. And I'm just like, that is amazing. I did not know this. But yeah, so this is definitely, you can see how dry the soil is. If I bring it in a bit closer, and hopefully I don't knock off half of my plants that are hanging, you can see how dry it is. And that was only watered 2 days ago. So it's kind of needed, really. So what I'm going to be doing is, let me put that down. I'm going to be using a pot, and always when you're repotting, try to only go up one kind of size, or maybe two. You don't want to go too much bigger, because it will probably then retain too much moisture, and there is a chance that you might get some root rot. So I'm just going to start filling in some of the base of this. I want to see, because I don't think it's going to get that much space at the bottom in relation to the size of the pot, because the pot isn't much deeper. So I'm only going to put about that much in the bottom. And then this is the fun bit. I'll see if it will come out of the terracotta. Otherwise, we might have some DIY with a hammer, basically. But let's have a look. Ooh. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to come out in one block. And yes, it did. You can kind of see it there. You won't be able to see the roots because, and this is the thing with plants that are not necessarily aroids, they don't have mahusive roots. But I'll see if I can bring it in a bit closer, and you might be able to see some of the roots there. I don't know whether or not that's going to show up in the camera. I'm not seeing it in the viewfinder, but trust me on this, it is very, very densely packed with roots and a bit matted as well. So this definitely needed a bit of a repot. So let me continue potting this up, and yeah, we can continue with the plant chores in just a second. Right, another little trick that I have learnt from gardeners far and wide, essentially, and I'm trying to do this in a way that might make sense, is when you've put a plant in there, instead of pressing things down, give the pot a tap, and that will essentially, I think the word is constitute the soil around what was that root mass, essentially, without you having to pack down heavily on the soil surface and then maybe potentially impact the soil. But let me do that a bit more. And there we go. We've got a repotted mastic plant. So let me put this down and we'll get to cracking with everything else. I'll take away the soil because the soil are kind of needed for this for now. I don't think I've got anything else that needs potting up. But yeah, and let's get cracking. Right, on to the madness that is my watering on Sunday. So just so you're aware, this looked horrendous. I do need to clean this up at some point in the base. But I use, essentially, I think this is meant to be a seedling tray or something for the garden, but there's a little spout here. And the reason why I do this is I've had it, there is a table down beneath me, basically, just because can't get everything on the screen otherwise. And what I'll do is I'll usually put the plants in and then just water over the top of them. So let me pick up the first plant and talk you through what I would do. The reason why, before I do that, the reason why I use this specifically with the little spout is I don't reuse the water that I'm using in this. So what I will do is when this is full and it's quite a sturdy one for that reason. And I've got a door right behind where the camera is that leads into the garden. I will probably not show that on screen, but I'll always go and empty this out, that water, into the garden plants, mainly because I don't want certain pathogens or maybe something like a root mealybug passing from one plant to the other by reusing that water over and over again to water everything. The reason why I don't mind necessarily doing it in the garden is because in the garden, I know that there are going to be beneficial insects or possibly other things in the soil that if something like that does pass out to the plants in the garden, they're probably better equipped with dealing with it in that condition than they would be in essentially what most people forget with a household environment and with plants in pots is a relatively sterile environment. It's not in the wild, so we control a lot of these things. So that's what I would do normally with the watering. The first plant that I'm going to be watering is my medium blue, I think it's called, or the glaucous one. And you can see this is on a cork board or a board essentially instead of a moss pole. And I was very, very happy that it wasn't running. It did create a bit of a runner there, and there is a new leaf there. What I'm probably going to do is chop and propagate it. It was interesting because this happened whilst I was away recently to Greece, and I left the conservatory to be cared by a friend, and I wasn't expecting those days to be quite as warm as they were, which basically meant that the plants needed more frequent watering than I'd given instructions to that friend, that caregiver, to provide to the plants. And I think that's probably what happened, is this plant stayed dry for a bit too long and then created a bit of a runner, because other than that, it was doing really, really well on the board, and it's still doing okay. But yeah, I think that's probably what's happened. And what I will normally do when I water this plant is I will first drench, and hopefully that's coming in on the screen as well. I will drench to a certain point. I'll just water the plank and then water in. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, they might have been able to see that this is in pond. It's not in soil, but this one still doesn't have a water reservoir in it. And I think I've mentioned this on previous video. If I remember, I'll put the link up there. But essentially what I will do with most of my plants that are in pond that started off in soil, for the first, and I do it for quite a long time, for the first 3 to 6 months, I will just put them in pond. They will not be in a water reservoir, and I will water the pond the same way that I would water these plants if they were in an Aroid soil mix, just so they can acclimate better to the pond and then move them on to a water reservoir. The only thing that is different is if a plant has been propagated in pond directly, or if it's been propagated in water, then usually I will put a water reservoir pretty much immediately on the bottom of the pot and do it that way. The other thing that you will notice is I've got a small watering can, which makes the little spout makes it easier to water some of these more fiddly plants and kind of in little odd places that I want to reach to. And then what I will also have, and I'll show you that in a minute, is a much larger watering can, and this is because I've got some big plants and big pots, and it just makes it a bit easier to just water. The other thing that I will show you is how I prepare my water. And talking about how I prepare my water, I'll tell you basically, and this is because I've got so many plants now in pond that the rest of my soil or kind of growing media, which normally be my Aroid soil mix, gets pretty much the same treatment because I just can't have 6 different watering cans with different waters in them basically. But what I'll do is I will use liquid gold leaf, and this is probably mirroring on the screen. I think I have since been able to add the link to liquid gold leaf down in the description below. The one thing I will say for some of my American viewers is I had a great, I can't remember if she was a subscriber on here or if she was a follower on my Instagram, but she is very proud she went and got liquid gold leaf in the States. I did not realize, I think there is a company there that creates their version of plant food, which is also called liquid gold leaf, but it's not the same company. So it is this one that I use for the people that are not based in the UK and Europe, basically, and that might want to get it. I do think that they do ship abroad. Obviously, this isn't sponsored. It's just one that I've been using for the last 3 or 4 years, and me and a lot of people here swear by it. But the good thing about this, and I've done a whole different video about fertilizers, and hopefully I'll see if I can link it somewhere, is that you can use it as a traditional fertilizer, and I'm trying to see what the... So it's 2 milliliters per liter of water, but you can also use it in semi-hydro by doing 0.5 or 1 milliliters in a liter of water. And you don't need to pH balance it. There's all these things that if you've got loads of different things for semi-hydro that you would have to do, I have found this to be a godsend. The one thing I will say about this, and I think most people are aware of this, it can smell a bit eggy. I think they've changed the formulation. This is a new one that I've got that doesn't smell, so I don't know whether or not they fixed that now. It used to be a more kind of creamy, almost yellowy color, and it yellowed more the more it was kind of used. This is kind of a brilliant white now, so I don't know if something has changed in the formulation, because I think a lot of people were struggling a bit with the smell. But, I mean, it worked, so I don't care. But it's got loads of different things on it. The NPK on this one, for those that are interested, if they can't get this and they want to get something equivalent, is the NPK is 9, 5, 16. But on top of everything else, on top of the usual NPK, it also has some of the micro minerals that plants need, things like iron, zinc, manganese, boron, copper, and other things like that, basically. And it has been stabilized in terms of its pH as well. So that's the one thing that I will use. And what I will do with this is I will dilute it to the point of semi-hydro. So for a 5 liter watering can, which I think it's also got gallons on there as well. So I might be able to tell people how much it is in kind of measurements that might be understandable in the States as well. I think from what I'm seeing, 5 liters is 1 gallon. So it would be 5 milliliters per gallon, or 5 milliliters per 5 liters, basically. And then the other thing that I will add, and I don't know whether or not this is causing any issues of kind of counterindication, but I haven't seen any real issue with my plants yet. By the way, this does come with a little pipette, which is quite handy because obviously you need to measure out how much you need to use. This I think did, but I'm not entirely sure. I got smaller quantities of this because I think there's a 10 milliliter bottle of this. And because I was using it so quickly and I went through 3 or 4 bottles, the small bottles, I just went for it. This is the bigger size, believe it or not, and there's an even bigger one. So this is monosilic, this is silicate basically. And this is an interesting one. I'm not going to bore you. If you want a bit more information on this, let me know and I can talk about it. I didn't want to mention this, and I've been using this for nearly a year now, and I think it's called Grow Genius. It can be tricky to find at times. This one, the reason why it's so small, even the big one, is per liter of water, you need a drop. So a little will go a long way. But yeah, I can do a separate video on this if you want. Let me know, because this has been a bit of a godsend for both my indoor house plants and my outdoor kind of garden plants and vegetables, basically. This isn't particularly cheap, I will say that, but it essentially strengthens the tree against potential pests or disease. It doesn't stop the plants from getting them, basically, but it just makes them more resilient. And also the reason why I got this is because it also kind of strengthens up the plants for cold damage. So that's another interesting thing. This also can be diluted and used in a spray bottle, ideally not internally, because I don't think you're meant to inhale this, externally kind of in the garden for pest control. So that gives you a bit of an indication. But enough about that. If you want a separate video on this, let me know and I can create that. The other thing that I will always do with my watering is I will always, doesn't matter if it's pond or anything else, I will always tip the planter just to make sure that any water that might be sitting at the very bottom of whatever pot it might be has come out before I place it back on the shelf. And now the other thing that I normally would do, I can't do it right now because it's on my phone and I'm filming this on my phone, but I have put it on an iPad and I will grab it in. By the way, this is going to be a bit of a rough and ready video, the same thing that it was with the conservatory, because I don't even want to know how long this would take me to edit heavily. So you might see me going in and out of screen on occasion. I'll see if I can, if it's for a long time, I'll see if I can speed it up. But so I've put it on my iPad, taken screenshots essentially, but it gives me an indication every day of the plants that I need to water. Some people might say that's a bit over the top, but I finally did a count of my plants the other day, and I kind of ended up somewhere around 450 and 500 plants. You need some kind of system in order to be able to water all these things. When I had like 10 to 20 plants, I could just kind of eyeball it and say, okay, you probably need some water. I'm going to water you now off the cuff. I cannot do it with this many plants when they've all got different care requirements, fertilizing requirements, all of these things. So this is a lifesaver. And I think I always have got it linked down in the description down below. Again, as I'm saying, none of this is sponsored, so have a look if you want. I think at the moment the app that I'm using is only available on Android, unfortunately. So, but it is very, very good. And it basically gives me a list of everything that I need to water. I also know in advance what I need to be watering with. I have done an entire video on that plant care app, and I'll see if I can link it at the top here. If I remember correctly, I can only link about 5 things per video. So at some point I might run out. If I do, it will be down in the description below. So yeah. But yeah, this gives me an indication of what I need to be looking at. And it just gives me a bit of peace of mind because I can kind of foresee what's happening. I can schedule things like repots and it will ping on me because, yeah, just no, it's just too much. But yeah, so that was one of the plants I needed to look at. The other thing, I can't necessarily bring you along for, which is just to double check my anthurium. And as I've mentioned on previous videos, the way that I do my app, use this app essentially, isn't, oh, I need to water now, I'm going to water now regardless. No, what I use this is check. Does it need watering? If so, water. If not, delay, which you can also do on the app by delaying it by a day or 2, or however many you need to do, how many you guess you might need for that plant. So some plants I'm not going to be able to move, but I might move you with me to those plants so you can have a look. Okay, this is the bit where you come with me, so there's going to be a lot of unflattering close-ups, but let's have a look. So the first thing that I would do, and you can see my huge new Veitchii leaf. So yeah, the Veitchii is kind of a bit large and in charge at the moment. Let me put down this watering can, and I want to talk about something else that you may have noticed on that plant, but you might have not have seen it before. So this is, and let me see if I can bring it out without damaging the plant too much. So this is, let me see if I can get it to focus. There you go. So this is a card of predatory wasps. They're not ones that would necessarily harm or cause pain to humans, basically, but these are predatory wasps for whitefly, because ironically enough, something that I've started seeing a bit more in the conservatory this summer is whitefly, which is not something I've ever dealt with before, but I've had such good success with predatory insects before that I thought I would try this. And so far, I will say, it is working a charm, because essentially what these predatory wasps will do is they will find the whitefly. This might not be for the kind of sensitive souls out there, but they will go and essentially pierce, if I remember correctly, they pierce the body of the adult whiteflies and inject their babies into the whitefly, thus killing the whiteflies. Great. And to be fair, I haven't actually ever seen these wasps around. And as I said, I think if I remember correctly from looking at it, they are so minuscule and they will not cause harm to me or to my plants, which, great, fantastic, basically. So let me put this back on and then we can kind of have a look at some of the watering. I might kind of take myself off the screen and just talk you through because it'll be easier for me to point the camera. Okay, so for this one, you might see that the Veitchii is in a water container. Normally, I'm supposed to be watering right now. I will not, however, because it doesn't need to be watered. There's still water in the container. With my anthuriums, as soon as the water reservoir is empty, I will then fill it up. But you can see, unfortunately, there was a bit of leaf damage that happened on that new leaf when it emerged, which has kind of caused a bit of an issue there. You might also be able to see that I have tied it on because otherwise things fall off shelves. Anybody who's had pon fall off a shelf and scatter everywhere, I feel your pain, as does everybody else that has undoubtedly that has happened to. So I won't water that one specifically. I was watering it a bit more frequently recently because that leaf was hardening off essentially. So I always find with my anthuriums, I don't want to let that water reservoir dry out when the leaves are the new leaves are growing in and hardening off. They tend to suck up water at an alarming rate, basically. So this plant normally would get its water reservoir filled every 3 to 5 days. When this new leaf was emerging and hardening, it was emptying up that water reservoir and I was refilling it daily. That gives you an indication. I have also got a new leaf coming in on my regale or regale here, and you might be able to see that's the old leaf there. The very, very old leaf is dying off there, and a lot of people do get this. There is the usual moss collar there, and you can see it's got a bit of a water reservoir. That, however, does need a bit of watering. So what I will do, and this is where you'll get the benefit of these smaller watering cans with that longer nozzle, is I'll water it there, make sure that nothing is going to drip out the sides, and then that's done. And the reason why I'm doing this is the same reason what I was talking about with the veitchii, is because it's got a new leaf that's hardening off, it does suck up water a lot more frequently. That was as full as that is now yesterday at this time, so that gives you a bit of an indication. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you might be able to see some damage there and there on the leaf. And if you look at the back of the leaf, it is caused by something that was essentially, it was a mechanical damage. So it was something that was touching the leaf as it was emerging, essentially. So be very, very careful with some of your more sensitive anthuriums that you don't touch the leaf as much as possible when it's emerging. This one, unfortunately, I hadn't seen, and it was knocking up against one of these elements on my plant shelves. So unfortunately, that damage is going to be something I'm going to be dealing with. I'm pretty sure that's what happened with the veitchii as well. Let me show you another example of this on my crystallinum. Actually, before we move on to crystallinum, let me show you that on a vitarifolium as well. You can see there it was touching something and it caused issues. Then looking at the crystallinum, which is such a nice huge leaf, can you see that ruffling that's happening there? If I turn this leaf to the back, you might be able to see why there's a bit of dieback that happened there, obviously when it was touching something, and it's going to cause that pretty much what is going to be permanent puckering now on that leaf. I don't mind, it's okay, but just bear in mind, try to handle your anthurium leaves as little as possible when they are growing. So another one of the plants that I do need to check, not water straight away, is my Alocasia dragon scale. And it's doing quite nicely. It is in pond, it is in a self-watering container. You might be able to see some of the dustiness that is happening there. Believe it or not, this happens quite often. And the way that I will always water, especially whether they're in a reservoir or not, with my pond is every fourth watering normally. So as you saw, my water has got the nutrient solution in it. Every fourth watering for that specific plant, and again, something that I'm tracking on my app, I will flush it through with clean water and fill the reservoir with clean water, not the solution water, just because I want to make sure that I'm flushing the media as much as possible. I know this is something that you get with leca, and with leca I think it can kind of get out of control a bit faster. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments below. I tried leca, I gave up really quickly, way too much hassle. Pond for me has been a much better option, and I know a lot of people that have used it would kind of agree with me there, but I still like to flush out. And what I will always do is I will flush out this, but I will also clean this out. And the dustiness that you can see is the kind of particles that are on the pond, essentially those little rocks will create that, so I always like to clear that out as well. In this case, and I don't know whether or not it's going to come up on camera, it might do, possibly, you might be able to see some condensation in there. With Alocasia, I would probably still water this because Alocasias are essentially plants that live close to rivers or lakes and things like that, so they're okay with a bit more moisture. The one thing I will say about the Alocasia though, however, pond seemed like a no-brainer for Alocasia, but in my experience, moving an alocasia, however small or established it might, small or large or established or not as established, in soil straight into pond by removing the media, I have not had great success with this. Let me know if you have had good success with this one. I pretty much had to start from scratch, and I will show you why, and hopefully I'll have a picture of this plant when I originally got it, which was a lot bigger than it is now, believe it or not, about 3 or 4 years ago now, and I put it here, and it's from my plant care app, like I do with my review series. I couldn't ever keep this plant potentially very, very happy. It kept getting edema at the back of the leaves, and it was a shame because this is by far, I think, one of my favorite looking alocasias. Years later, I still love this plant. And I had to start from scratch because it died back to the level, even with everything that I tried to do with the soil and the frequency and the soil media and all of these things and the different lighting conditions, and it just wasn't happy. When I moved it into pond, however, it's now happy. I'm no longer getting, I'm getting a tiny bit of edema or maybe 1 or 2 of the leaves, but nothing that would cause it a lot of harm. It seems to be liking life, and I am very happy about this. It's taken me that long to get the care right for this plant. So, bit of a teaching moment for people that are just getting into this. Be kind to yourself. Some things, even for people that have been doing it for a long, long time, take a while before you get it right. As I said, nearly 4 years to try to get the care for this plant right to the point where it's happy. So be kind to yourself. If you don't get it right within the first 3 months, it's okay. It could take a lot longer than that. It's fine. But with this one, what I'll do now is I will just water as I would normally do. So I would kind of water through, and I will let it drip into what essentially is my little janky homemade water reservoir. So it's got a bit of water there at the bottom, and I will put this back on the shelf and move on to the next plant. And now for the next plant, which a lot of people might be surprised is an actual calathea. And I don't know whether or not I've got a picture of this. If I do, I'll add it here again from the plant care app. But when I got it, it was, the whole plant was about that big. And granted, I do know I've got some brown bits, which I need to remove. But this is one of the plants that I will get my big watering can and make sure that when I'm watering, I am watering thoroughly and all around the base. And I'm pretty sure you can't see me and you can see the plant now, but and just make sure that it is draining down the bottom. I cannot stress enough the importance of drainage holes. And again, tilting it to make sure that that water is fully out of that plant. And I will pop this back down and move on to the next one. I did want to show you the other Alocasia dragon scale that I've got, which is the Alocasia dragon scale silver, I think. And it is eagle-eyed amongst yourself. Reuse, recycle as much as possible, basically. Granted, that's easier said than done because I'm in my conservatory and it's my little mad haven, and I'm usually the only person that sees this. I probably wouldn't have a Lurpak container sitting proudly on the window ledge in my living room when I've got guests coming around. But this is also in pond. This is in a water reservoir. This was being propagated, and there is a little corn. I don't know whether or not you might be able to see it right there, and it's actually popping out of the soil media. I've also got a Peperomia caparata, and I can't remember which one this pink version is. It was a pickup from a plant nursery. This had almost died back to nothing because I had it in soil and I moved it into pond. Peperomia, I find, do take a beat to get used to pond. But since then, it's doing exceptionally well. This was in, both of these were in a propagation tank. The lighting that I was using wasn't strong enough, so they didn't really grow particularly well. But I have since moved them out, and I was out in my conservatory and looking at a window through a net curtain because it's summer. Otherwise, they're going to burn to a crisp. Right. Let me put this back down and I'll touch a bit more on the propagation box and the issues around that. With the propagation box, as I was saying, obviously it had artificial lighting. It was LED grow lights. They weren't particularly strong, but the other thing to kind of almost bear in mind, and I've only touched on this on occasion, is try to get a light meter app on your phone. Now, I know a lot of the plant scientists out there and a lot of the light scientists out there will say your phone's sensor isn't as good as getting a full proper one that might be hundreds of pounds or dollars to get. I grant you that. I would love to have a gadget like that. Even me with a collection as much as I have, I still wouldn't go as far as buying it at that price. With the phone, at least it will give you a bit of a rough guide, especially if you're just coming to terms with kind of light levels, because what in the hell does even bright indirect light mean? Use something like that, and I think there's apps that are free most of the time on both the Apple Store and the Android Play Store, and start checking with your camera's light sensor what the light levels are. And the way that I would say to use that is if you've got a plant that's sitting in a location that you know would appreciate bright and direct light and it's doing well in that location, take a reading from that location and see what that plant is getting from that window and from that light source. It might be artificial lighting as well. Then, if you've got other plants that have got similar care requirements, try to find other light sources that have got a similar level of light. And that at least is a jumping point for you to start playing around with location and light levels and kind of how close it might be to a light source, how many hours of light it's getting, all of these things. So with that, I should have taken a reading. It really wasn't particularly strong, which meant that the plants didn't really die. They did a tiny bit of growing, but not an awful lot. And they were in a very kind of controlled environment because it was in a propagation box. But since moving it out of there now and moving it to closer to a window where it's getting more light, everything that was in that box is now doing a lot better, a lot faster. Granted, it is growing season, so I would expect nothing less. Now is the time to water my Esmeraldents. So what I will do, as I said, I will check the soil and see if it actually needs watering. I'm pretty sure it will do, but I'll show you what I would do still to this day, years later, after caring for as many plants as I do. So you can see the soil is looking quite dry. You can see how dry it's looking, and I will pop in my moisture meter, and guess what? It is dry. And I will put it in another place as well and make the measurement there as well. And you can see it's still relatively, it's on that cusp. And the reason why I don't mind, this plant I have found will go to a lot drier, but I don't want to do that right now because, and let me show you, it has got a brand new leaf coming in. So I want to make sure that I'm not depriving it of water. And what I will do is I will take my big watering can and water in. And hopefully it might focus. It's focusing on everything but the actual root mass there. But you might be able to see it's sitting on a really, really big drip tray, because this is one of my Prius plants as well. And it's also sitting on some terracotta legs. And you might be able to see them if I bring it in a bit closer. You might be able to see the legs there. Granted, it is a bit filthy in there. At some point I do need to lift it up and clear it up, but the plant itself is not sitting in that water, so that's the good thing. It means I can water freely without having to lift up this plant, because the reality is, barring all of the ties and barring how much it is attached to the ties, it's also attached to the actual shelves itself. Do not worry about these. They are not spider mites, even though I have got a spider mite satchel there. That's an actual real spider, and you can see it's attached in so many places. I dread to think when I have to move this plant into a different location. I mean, at the moment I don't really have another location, but you can see the sheer volume of aerial roots as well. So yeah. Moving on to my Silta Picana, which you might be able to see there in the middle. And this one does technically need to be checked, so I will do my usual, and this is a lot easier for me. See, there you go. So this one I had watered, and if it will focus, I had watered more recently. This one will not need any watering, and let me take another reading from another place. And yeah, this can probably go for another day, so I will leave that for a tiny bit more. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, and this might be if anybody's going to have any form of PTSD or get triggered by seeing mealybugs specifically as a pest, maybe skip this bit a bit. But there is a dead leaf that I wanted to kind of show, especially for people that might have not have experienced mealybugs yet in their environment and they're maybe just starting off now. This has come off my propagation of a Florida ghost, and I've mentioned on my Florida ghost review video, and again I'll see if I can put a link there, it doesn't have an awful lot of pests, mealybugs maybe, but only because I've struggled with mealybugs generally in here. And I will show you now what they look like, and this is a leaf that dropped off naturally. You can see there a couple of the adult mealybugs. Joy. And on the other side, if I bring it up and bring it in a bit closer, and hopefully it might focus, those are also mealybugs. They're not quite as fluffy yet. They're a bit more juvenile. So normally if I'd seen this on an actual green leaf that was still attached to the plant, what I will always have in my conservatory as I'm going around and watering, and always try to get into the habit of just do a quick look at your plant whilst you're there, whilst you're watering that plant. Just do a quick check, see if you're seeing anything like spider mites, mealybugs. That's how you catch it early enough, and that's how you make sure that you're not going to have a huge infestation of all of these things. I will always have my solution with neem oil, and I will spray it down. With mealybugs specifically, you can also use a cotton tip, Q-tip, and some rubbing alcohol, spray it down and pull it off as well. The problem that I'm having with that at the moment, there's too many, and some of my plants are in really difficult places to reach. So, and I have bought, before somebody asks, I have bought the mealybug predatory insects, both the juveniles and the mature form, which are the ones that look like little black ladybirds or ladybugs. I have had zero success with them, basically. And I know that the juveniles can look quite similar to the mealybugs, but they're a bit fluffier and they move a lot faster. And I've spotted one or two generally, but it's a relatively expensive predatory insect. And I've tried it, and I've tried it in quantity, and I have really just not had any success with that, which pains me to no end, basically. But yeah, if you've had some better success with something else, please let me know in the comments down below. But I think this video might already be getting way too long. If you do enjoy these types of videos, do let me know, because I can make them and I can kind of take you along and kind of chat through things on my Sunday kind of care day, and hopefully you can see how I do things. Obviously share if you do things differently in the comments down below. I'd love to know. My way is not the correct way, it's just the way that works for me in my environment. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed a bit of a like off the cuff video, and hopefully I shall see you here soon. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.